So today I want to talk about an article that was in the most recent edition of Tinnitus Today magazine, summer 2025. And the headline is Government Guidance on Tinnitus Relief. And it's essentially the Veterans Administration's result of the research done by the Veterans Administration to provide guidance for their providers on the patients who come to them for tinnitus. So I'm not going to go over the whole report. I just want to talk about the one of the recommendations that has me a little irked, as you'll see. Not only me, as I'll talk about. So essentially they divide the treatments into recommended and those about which there's insufficient evidence for and they don't recommend. And mindfulness comes under the heading of a treatment for which there is insufficient evidence for. And I want to say a couple things about this recommendation. First, my first problem with this is that the whole categorization scheme, this bifurcation of sufficient evidence for, we're going to recommend, not sufficient evidence for, or insufficient evidence for, don't recommend. That dichotomy overlooks a lot of gray areas. So as the VA report says, if you read into the fine print, that insufficient evidence is a rather vague term. What does that mean? And it's really a catch-all term. It can mean not enough clinical trials, conflicting results, or no evidence whatsoever. So they just throw everything that they don't feel has sufficient evidence by whatever standard they use into this other pile. And my problem with that is it really it doesn't provide adequate guidance for those looking for working with their tinnitus. Right? I mean, you wouldn't know that there's been a dozen trials, 3 or 4 randomly controlled trials with mindfulness and tinnitus. That's nowhere on here. All you're going to see from this recommendation list is, cognitive behavior therapy is recommended. Mindfulness is not. I'll talk about that false dichotomy in a second as well. So my first complaint about this is that this either or categorization is just, it's great for providers, great for telling you what the VA, if you're a member, will and will not pay for, but it's a really lousy way to provide information for the patients. And I can understand why the VA would do that. They can't pay for everything. But my complaint, and I've written, along with Dr. Bruce Hubbard, written a letter to the American Tinnitus Association about this article, is that it really doesn't represent the nature of the evidence for mindfulness. And as a result, is not going to be helpful to the patient. I mean, what they're going to see is mindfulness is not insufficient evidence for, and so the most likely result of this categorization is just to push mindfulness, a very promising treatment, one which I admittedly, an intervention I admittedly use because of the evidence, both research-wise and my own personal experience in working with hundreds of clients. It gets pushed to the side, so the result's going to be just a rejection or a lack of utilization of these therapies, a lot of these that we know have evidence for. So this categorization is not a scientific categorization. It's a choice that the VA used to give another example how you could have presented the evidence in a more helpful way. The American Psychological Association has similar recommendations for trauma therapy. Let's just say, here's the one we have the most evidence for, and everything else is in the garbage pile. Say, this is the strongest evidence, and here's why. This is a second tier treatment, and here's why. Maybe it just hasn't been around long enough. There's not enough clinical trials, which is the case with mindfulness. Right? and here's the third tier. Right? So, presenting the evidence in a different way, which I don't expect the VA to do. Right? They just are providing recommendations for their providers, but I do expect Tinnitus Today to provide some context for the readers to interpret these recommendations and not just repeat them. I think that's the main issue, is it misrepresents the evidence for treatments for especially mindfulness, and I haven't looked at the other recommendations, to be honest. And as a result, does not provide guidance for tinnitus patients. It says government guidance on tinnitus relief, but the only people it's guiding are VA providers. Right? That's what this is for, not for patients, and it fails patients. This simple chart fails patients in a lot of ways, some of which I've talked about. Another issue I have with this recommendation is just this distinction between cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness is not one that's recognized in the psychological community, in the therapeutic community. Again, Dr. Bruce Hubbard wrote a wonderful article on this for Tinnitus Today, and I'll reference this in the notes for this talk. Mindfulness is known as third-wave cognitive therapy. I don't know any other way to say that. So one could just as easily have thrown mindfulness together with CBT, and that was a choice. I mean, you could certainly justify it, but you at least ought to take in the evidence that this is a form of a development of cognitive therapy, sort of what's traditionally known as a CBT, especially in the audiology world, is called in therapy world second wave CBT. Third wave CBT includes mindfulness, acceptance and commitment therapies, compassion focused therapies, all these modalities that are shown to be incredibly effective, which is why they're more in use right now than kind of this classic older model of CBT, which has been superseded. In fact, most of the studies of mindfulness and tinnitus have used mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. How is that not cognitive therapy? Right? So I suspect there's just audiologists writing this report, and that's why they flubbed this one. But they did, in all honesty. And a final thing I'll note, and I say this in the letter, the way I'll read it because I like the way I put it in the letter, if I could find it, is essentially, it says that the VA is not the VA is not the College of Cardinals. Right? They're not some infallible body. In fact, there are other recommendations by scientific committees on tinnitus. The American Academy of Family Physicians takes a very different approach or draws a very different conclusion, and I just want to read this word for word. Cognitive behavior therapy is the only treatment with moderate to high quality evidence to suggest benefit on the primary tinnitus. The VA offers at least 2, 4, 6, 8 different therapies under recommended. So there's obviously some dispute about what constitutes being recommended. And I guess I would like to make one last point about one of their recommendations, and one of their recommended treatments is sound therapy. And there's this wonderful article. I'll put a link to it, 2008 by Lawrence McKenna and Richard Irwin, which is titled Sound Therapy for Tinnitus, Sacred Cow or Idol Worship, an Investigation of the Evidence. And it concludes, the evidence concerning whether sound therapy results in additional benefit to that offered by the psychological component of tinnitus therapy is mixed, but overall it suggests that sound therapy results in little or no extra benefit. It is likely that when sound therapy does benefit people with tinnitus, the effect is mediated by psychological factors. So take that, VA. So the report's a mess. It does provide guidance for VA providers, and they have to do that. They got to pay for some things, not pay for others. They need consistency throughout the system. No problem with them offering recommendations, but to put it in here like it's guidance from heaven, which essentially it is. Government guidance, and the subtitle is developed by the Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense. Well, now the Department of War, right? These new clinical practice guidelines set a national standard that informs care for all. And therein lies the danger, right? This should do no more than tell VA providers what to recommend and VA patients what they can expect to get paid for. It provides, again, worse than no guidance for patients, I would submit. So if you stuck around this long, you may like the channel, you can subscribe to it. I appreciate that. Anyway, thank you for showing up.